There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. All right, today I want to talk about real life, honest to goodness business transformation story. And more importantly, we're talking to the person who led it and is still leading the company. You know, I get tired of those stories where somebody says the transformation and then they leave and you never really know what actually happened. So today we get to hear what actually happened. So if you're thinking about how your business can be more high tech, regardless where the level of current technology is, I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. And if you're wondering how to get other people on board, how to persuade them, or how to manage resistance, then I promise you this is the conversation for you. So my guest today is Stephen Blue. Steve is CEO of Miller Ingenuity, which creates high technology products that save lives and preserve the environment. He's a keynote speaker, having worked at a whole bunch of places, including Harvard Business School, the United Nations, Carnegie Hall, Safe America Foundation, Industry Week, and the list goes on and on and on. He's CEO in residence at Winona State University and is the author of 5 best-selling books, including Mastering the Art of Success, The $10 Million Employee, and Metamorphosis. And he works with executives, leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyone is looking to maximize their company growth. You can find out more on his website at stephenlblue.com. Steve, welcome to the conversation. Delighted to talk with you today.
Well, thanks, Wanda. I'm excited to be here.
Okay. All right. I have to say, I really like this book, Metamorphosis, and I really love the story of the transformation of the company. So would you just start at the top and say, what did you find when you started there? What did you realize was wrong? What did you do?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, so I'll
Yep.
kind of way back. When I got to the company, long before I did Metamorphosis and wrote that book, the good thing about it is that it had some really good products and good reputation with the customers for the products, but they only had 2 customers. And those 2 customers would then resell, and then that entity would resell again and resell again. Sometimes the product would change hands a half a dozen times before it actually got to an end user. And of course, every time it changed hands, the price went up, the margin went up, and all kinds of bad things were happening in the marketplace because it attracted lots of competition. And my company didn't have a clue as to what was going on in the marketplace because we only had 2 customers. So the first change I had to make was to go direct to the end user. And it sounds like a simple change, but to go direct to the end user, it's not as simple as, but it's sort of like changing a shipping address increased our profitability by like 10 times. I mean, it was an enormous amount. But making that change, of course, when you only have 2 customers and they give you long lead times, that's a certain set of conditions. Then all of a sudden, when you've got 100 customers all over the world with short lead times, that involves a massive organizational internal change. And so the first thing I had to do was get the workforce ready to be enabled to move faster, move on a dime, et cetera, et cetera. And that was not easy because the workforce I had was used to like doing not much. And they liked it that way, and they didn't want to make any changes. And we're going to talk about change a lot today. And they used to hire people if they had a pulse when they walked in the front door. Well, that just wasn't going to work under the new environment. So the first thing I had to do was totally transform the workforce from what it was to what it needed to be to meet the new conditions. And that involves a lot of firings, because some people just didn't want to make the trip. It involved a lot of hand-holding. It involved a lot of education, training, et cetera, et cetera. Now I'm talking the span of a couple of years now to do that. We turned over the factory, I think 3 times in about 4 years. It took that long to get to the point where we had the workforce we wanted, and they wanted to be here. And in the beginning, I raised compensation because we weren't at market. And that was a problem. And so the sort of like the compact between employees and the company at that point in time was, we won't pay you very much and we won't ask you for very much either. And so then I said, okay, guys, we're going to pay you what you ought to be paid, what we need you to be paid, what's market value for you to be paid. But the expectations of what you have to do are going to go way up. Some people didn't want that. Some people, you know this too, Wanda. Some factories, you check your brains at the door. And some people like it that way. And when I transformed the workforce to become self-directed, some people said, no, I don't want that. I want to be able to stop my brains when I walk in the door. And when I go to the bowling alley at the end of the shift, I want to plug them back in again. And while it sounds great to be a self-directed workforce and to be a team, everybody wants to be part of a team, the accountability that comes with that just didn't make the trip. So we totally transformed the workforce over the course of about maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years. It took that long to get the internal workforce to be able to deal with the changes that were coming.
Right. So when you say change the workforce, are you meaning that 100% of the people left, or did you keep 10%, or like how much are we talking about?
That's a good question. In terms of the whole workforce, I would say 2% was all I kept. And the other 98 weren't worth keeping anyway. And you have to do this carefully, of course. You got to keep the lights on. You got to keep making shipments and all that. So you don't just walk out there and say, okay, you're all fired. Now go try to find other people. You had to. It was, in fact, the guy that I hired to effect that change, I asked him, I said, well, how much of the factory do you think you'll have to change? He said, all of it. I said, how long will that take? He said, probably 2 to 3 years to get that done. And that's essentially how it rolled out. We only kept about 2% of the workforce. And they're still with me today, 25 years later.
Right. You kept the ones that wanted to go for the journey and the rest out of there.
Exactly.
And you were not living in a major metropolitan area where there were loads and loads and loads of people around you to employ. So did that become a challenge, finding new?
Well, it did. And there's a couple of ways that I did that. One is, now, fast forward 25 years, Miller Ingenuity has a phenomenal image in the community. It's like known as the place to work. And I've told people, and I know this from way back, I don't want to be the highest payer in town. That does not guarantee me the best people. I want to be, in a competitive place and so forth. And so the reason that we have never had trouble recruiting people is because of our stellar reputation in the community. We got that mostly because of our community involvement, philanthropy, raising the visibility of who we are and what we do in the community. And so that's been, even now in the last couple of years when the workforce is really tight, and I'm sure it's going to always be that way. It's not that's a structural problem with baby boomers and so forth. Even with the tightness of the labor market after the pandemic, I don't have any trouble hiring anybody.
Hiring people. Okay. Did you have a moment in time where the community turned against you? I mean, all these people are laid off. Was there a moment when that was a challenge?
Yeah, there was lots of moments. The community never turned against me, but you know this better than most people. It's not change that really bothers people. It does, but that's not change. It's what is the change going to mean? That's what, and it's better if they know what it means than if they don't know what it means. So the only thing worse than change is the anticipation of the change that you don't know.
Yeah.
And so when I started making all the changes, I got all kinds of resistance. I had people going to my board saying, if you don't get rid of this madman, he's going to destroy the company. And my board was on my butt every once in a while. What are you doing? What are you doing? I had all kinds of death threats. I unfortunately, I'm used to that in my career and in my life. I've done a lot of change, and none of it was welcome. I remember one time that I had a call. It was on my voicemail. I didn't actually answer the phone. It was a female who said, "This is Sister Patrill. And if you don't stop screwing, I won't say what her name was. In the second shift, I'm going to tell your wife." And, most people don't remember who Sister Patrill was. I do. It was Sally Fields and the Flying Nun. That was her name. So I don't know. So the first thing I did after I got the voicemails, I called my wife, said, I want you to listen to it. And so I got a lot of pushback. I'll give you another example. When I took over, the people in the factory, the way they talked to each other was horrible. Just horrible. The vilest of language. I'm not talking damn. I'm not talking hell. I'm talking the worst kind of language. And I've always believed that how people behave is rooted in their language, and how people interact together is rooted in language. And if you want people to be a team, if they talk to each other in hateful terms, that's not ever going to happen. So I got everybody together and I said, here's the deal. Beginning right now, as soon as I walk off this stage, there will be a zero tolerance policy for that kind of language. And I said, I'm not talking about damn, I'm not talking about hell. You guys know what I'm talking about. And of course, I've been around a long time. So I knew they were going to test me. Within an hour, I had to fire a guy for using one of those words. 2 hours later, I fired 2 more. And
wow.
By the end of the day, I wasn't sure I'd have a factory left by the end of the week. I probably fired a dozen people on that basis alone, because they didn't believe when I said that I meant it, that it was zero tolerance. And they actually thought they had a right to swear. In the meeting, they told me, you can't tell us we can't swear. I said, sure I can. You can't swear in your church. You can't use that kind of language at the local food mart. You don't use it in your schools. If you want to use it in your home, I don't care, but you can't use it anywhere else. And they just felt that they had a right to swear. So that was kind of the first thing I did. And that was, tough transition.
That is a tough transition. I can imagine the pushback you got on that one. I hear lots of leaders say, we want X behavior. Okay. And we're not going to tolerate a lack of that behavior, whatever it is, whatever the, thing is. But they don't go so far as actually removing somebody, because usually the first person that tests it is somebody who's got a little bit of power in the organization. They've got some expertise we need. They've got a reputation. They've got a whatever. And we kind of say, okay, I warned you, no more tolerance. And then off we go. So it's, I think if you say that, you got to back it up. First one.
You have to back it up, because you will always be tested.
Yeah.
Oh, and in my case, when I first walked around the factory, there was a sign posted on the wall. I don't know what it was like 56 days or 58 days or something. Then a couple of days later, I'd walk out and I noticed this now it's 53. What's going on? And somebody told me, well, those are the number of days you have left before they fire you.
Oh, wow. So you are super popular, huh?
Oh, they love me. Well, the other problem was they'd hired 3 guys for me that didn't last more than a couple months.
Okay.
So the workforce figured, we'll just wait this guy out. And that's what people do. If you want to make a change, most people will say, let's just wait it out. He'll go away. Some will change. It won't actually happen.
Right. Now, Steve, I have to ask you, a logical person with clearly lots of opportunities in life, why did you decide to take on this job for a company that's kind of a bigger problem than might have appeared on the surface?
Yeah, well, see, you never know what you're getting into until you're into it. They sure didn't tell me when they interviewed me, the workforce sucks, this is wrong, that's wrong. And so they didn't tell me any of that. Well, fine, I get that. I was a divisional general manager for a big company, but now it's part of Alstom. It used to be part of Alstom. And I wanted to be a CEO. And there wasn't any way, based on a variety of factors, that I was going to be a CEO in that company. First of all, I can't remember if Alstom's English or German, I don't know. And so this job came up as a CEO. And at first, they offered it to me, and I said, no, I'm not ready to, no thanks, I'll pass. Then they hired another guy for 3 months, and they fired him, and then they called me again, which should have been my first clue. But if you want to be a CEO, this is what I tell people all the time, and you get an opportunity to be one, you take it. I don't care how ugly it is. I don't care where it is, because the experience you'll get and the information you put on your resume and so forth. And so this is a little company in a little town in Minnesota, and we were living in Chicago. And I brought my wife here when we did the, look around visit. And she goes, I hate that place. There's no way in hell you're going to move me there. And I said, tell you what, we're going to do this for 3 years. I put a notch in my belt as a CEO, and then we'll move to a bigger company, a nicer place and all that kind of stuff. 26 years later, you couldn't pry her out with a spoon.
I don't even want to know what else you bribed her with, but never mind. We won't even go there to get her to convince to come to
Thank
you
you.
this one.
She listens to this.
All right. So we've already realized at the beginning that you're selling to the wrong customer, so you're losing margin. There's a transition to get to find the end customer to convince them to buy from you directly, hopefully because there's some cost savings for the end customer. But that's a whole Salesforce effort. And there's a change in the company workforce to be able to respond to with speed, with demands, with et cetera. And a transition, as we've already described, talking over the factory. All right. So launching this change, tell me how you got it started. Did you make a big announcement? Did you do a small, how'd you get started on the change?
I've done a bunch of changes. The last one was I wrote about in my fifth book, Metamorphosis, when I basically, I didn't ignore or discard our mechanical product lines, but I introduced electronic product lines, which is a big cultural shift, a big knowledge shift. It's a big, like everything shift. So I made a bunch of transitions over the years, and I always talk about it in terms of clarity, concise, and compelling, are the 3 C's that I always use. You have to convince people that the change is necessary and why is it necessary. You have to compel them to want to move toward the change, and you have to be very clear about what the change is, because people will normally, they're afraid of change. So you need to explain it to them in 2 terms. And I did this with my board too, because my board didn't want any changes either. They're just like everybody else. And so you have to paint, here's all the good things that will happen if we do this. But that's not good enough, because people don't generally move toward positive outcomes. They move away from negative outcomes. So you have to paint the other side of it too. If we don't do this, here are all the bad things that will happen. And that's been the way that I've communicated every change, because otherwise, if you just tell people I want to change it for the heck of it, they go, why should I get behind this? Well, okay, I'll give an example. The first acquisition I made here is a company out in California. I had no intentions of keeping the workforce. I had no intentions of keeping their factory. And I didn't hide that. I had every intention of bringing it all back into my factory. And so I told my employees after I closed, in, I think it was outside of San Francisco. And I came back and made a speech with all my employees. I said, I've made 2 very different speeches today in the last 2 days. One was the company we just bought, when I told them, regrettably, they were all out of a job. And the reason I'm telling you this is because if you're not growing, you're shrinking, and they weren't growing. And so they were susceptible to be bought out actually for a song. And I said, the speech I'm making today is your employment security just went up, because we were the buyer and not the buyee. And so I always try to use real world examples of good and bad things that happen to companies. I used to use the example of Apple and the Twinkie. Remember the Twinkies? I think they're still around.
Yeah, they are. As a nostalgia brand.
They went bankrupt and belly up, and they got bought. And so I always, in those days, this is 10 or 15 years ago, I said, here's Apple, what they're doing, why they're doing it, because they're changing and they're improving. Twinkie was not. Kodak is another example of a company that people know about that had the opportunity to go into the digital marketplace, had the ability to, and decided not to, because basically they're harvesting their product. So I always paint the good and the bad picture.
Okay. All right. So you paint the good and bad picture. Sometimes people buy that. Some people don't buy that. So how do you make that compelling? I mean, how do you get people really bought on with the change?
You have to tell them what's in their self-interest. You have to sell them on that. At the end of the day, though, some people are not sellable on their self-interest because for a variety of reasons. And I get criticized for this a lot, but if you can't convince them and you can't buy them and you can't cajole them, then you got to fire them. Because if they're against the effort, all it takes is 1 or 2 people against the effort, even in a larger organization, and look to government for crying out loud. There's all kinds of people against each other in the government. You can't have that in a business. And so people know, and they understood that if you're not with the change, you won't be able to stay.
All right. I can imagine that works for a little while. And again, they're going to think, can I just ride you out? So I'm going to come back to that one in a moment. I want to talk about this electronic product line transformation because you're taking a traditional manufacturing business and turning it electronic. That is a whole upskilling and thinking capability and skills that people need and et cetera. How did you get that one through? I mean, did you again have to change your workforce? What happened?
Well, it was a couple of things. First of all, I bought a little company that was in low technology electronics. All, the kind of product line that most people could understand. It wasn't high tech. It wasn't AI, any of that. And so, and it was a small integration, but it was a decent product line, $1 million a year, something like that. And so then we started training our employees in that product line. Something that anybody had a Heath kit when they were a kid would understand, or what was it, the Radio Shack would understand. And so that was my way of sort of getting my toe into the market, into the higher than mechanical product line. And then when I decided to go full on with a couple of very high tech products, I knew that the workforce wasn't ready for it for a couple of reasons, not the least of which they didn't know how to innovate. Innovation sounds like a simple thing, as you know, it's not. And so you'll think this is crazy. Well, everyone I've told thinks it's nuts. That's fine. I hired the guy that used to be the chief creativity officer for the QVC network to come in and teach every single employee in the place the principles of innovation. So people go, what? That's a home shopping network. What does he? Well, he was part of the transformation of, I don't know, a couple of $100 million a year to billions a year. And so he came in and I had him, he was here once a week for a year, meeting with all my employees in small groups, basics of innovation, starting with the building blocks of brainstorming and kind of moving up the process from there. And so after about a year, they were at the point where he could turn them loose on opportunities and problems. So small groups, now they know how to do it. And you have to give them permission to do it. You can't say, well, you innovate, but you got to make the donuts. You're going to have to be 8 hours of donut making and on your own time innovate. You can't do that. I told the workforce, and I supported this. I said, I want you to spend 25% of your time on innovating. You get paid for 100%, which means you have to hire a few more people, because if they feel the pressure of the product is not getting out and the other work is not getting done, the point I wanted to make with everyone is innovation is the real work. You don't get to do the real work and, if I have time and maybe interest and nothing else to do, I'll do this innovating stuff. So they had already had permission. They were already getting paid to do it. And so they started walking around and they'd pick their own projects. They would devise their own solutions. In many cases, they would marshal their own resources. Sometimes it went beyond their ability, because of financial reasons, whatever. And so about 2 years into the process, a guy came up to me in the factory and he goes, we really like this innovation stuff, but we could do a lot more of it if we had a dedicated space dedicated only to innovating. And I looked at him and I said, let me make sure I get this right. You want me to take a part of my factory that actually makes money and turn it into a think tank? And by about then, he was thinking I probably should have never brought it up. And I said, I love the idea. I love the idea. So I built a space in the middle of my factory, because innovation is not a white collar thing. It's not a blue collar thing. It's an everybody thing, right? It cost me, this was 10 years ago, it cost me $500,000 to build this space. Very high tech, connected to everything, tranquil, conducive to thought and so forth. And now people go in there anytime they want, innovate anything they want. Nobody, my mother, God rest her soul, when she heard about this, she said, I don't know. How are you going to make sure those people are actually working back there? And I said, Mom, if I have to make sure they're actually working, I got the wrong people. And that's where it all starts. If you get the right people, you give them the tools, you give them the training, you give them the technique, you give them the space, you give them the time, and you give them the permission. It's amazing what people really want to do. People, this, people want to be fulfilled in their work lives. It's 80% of their whole life. I mean, they don't want to be thinking about the bowling alley all day long. But most many organizations don't allow them to do that. They don't give them the freedom to do that. They don't give them the flexibility to do that, and we do.
Well, you give them the freedom. I see organizations that give them the encouragement to innovate, but there's no space to innovate. Meaning, I don't mean physical space. There's no time in the calendar to find a moment to think, let alone 5 more moments to go convince 10 other people that it's a good idea and they should get on board with it. And then the moments to go and run an experiment to see if we were right in the first place. And. That's supposed to happen in marginal time, which is already completely consumed with double and triple booked meetings. I mean, I see this coming and going and managers wondering why we're not getting innovation. Yep, I'd agree.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And when I said I expect and want you to pay 25% of your time to innovation, that made a very big statement. And then the logical question is, how am I going to get all this work done when I have to use 25? I said, easy. I'm going to hire. I'm going to hire some more people to create that 25% space for you, because if it's optional, okay. In Apple and Google, innovation is like the job. That is like the job. In a manufacturer, the job is not innovation. And so if you don't make that, actually we make it part of their job description, and they get evaluated on how many ideas they brought forth. So it's not, boy, isn't it nice to innovate? It's, you better innovate. We'll teach you how. But if you can't do that or don't want to do that, then you just can't stay.
So there's many pieces to this, Steve, that I just want to highlight. One is you trained people on how to think about ideas, how to innovate quite extensively. Everybody gets training on how to do brainstorming properly, how to develop the ideas, how to work together as a team, how to identify good things. So they've got some skills. And then 2, you give them the time to innovate. So I'm expecting you to spend 25% of your time on this. We'll cover other things, but I'm expecting it. And then number 3, I'm going to evaluate you on how well you come up with new ideas, big, small, in all areas. And then 4, I'm going to take a middle of the factory that's making money, and I'm going to turn it into a space that's dedicated to innovation. So that says a signal altogether that I'm serious about wanting new ideas. And this is going to be the kind of place where ideas are welcome.
That's exactly right. And I got a lot of pushback, mostly from my board, about spending $500,000 on this space. And where's the beef? I can point to a couple of really major developments that came out of there. And there's a million that I don't even know what they are. I don't have to know what they are. I'm not supposed to know what they are, but they are. And I tell people all the time, a CEO won't bat an eyelash at spending $500,000 on a CNC machine. That's easy, right? Why? Because it's an income producing asset. Well, my argument is what I call the creation station is also an income producing asset. The difference between the two, CNC machine has a useful life. My creation station has an infinite life.
Right. That is a serious belief in innovation and the power of innovation. And that was the driving force then for turning. So you started with the electronic production lines with a small test case. And then you have this innovation, which then makes it easier to bring in additional electronic production, I'm assuming is the general path that follows. Okay. All right. So, wow, quite radical. So I have 2 rather radical ideas here. One has to do with the language that you treat people and you're going to get fired today if you don't follow up on that one. Several of you, not just one. 2 is this whole innovation and the emphasis behind innovation. Okay. Now I've heard you say that one wrong decision can be the end of a company. You want to kind of elaborate a little bit on what you mean by making wrong decisions?
Yeah, one of the reasons, and I've worked in multi-billion-dollar companies and I've worked in small startups. One of the reasons larger companies have an infinite amount of bureaucracy and levels, between the CEO and the person on the factory floor, could be 8, 10 level, I don't know, is because they don't want anybody ever in a position to make one wrong, stupid decision that can jeopardize the company. So what happens is opportunities that could propel the company never get to the guy that can make the decision. They never get up that far because it's a matter of CYA. I don't want to look bad in front of the boss and all that kind of stuff. When you are the CEO, though, if you make one really big bad decision, it can be the end of the company. It depends on what the decision is. If you bet the company on a new product, put all your resources and everything you got, and some companies do this, and it works, and then sometimes it doesn't work. I don't know. But you never want to, it's okay if you're going to lose a pail full of milk, but you don't want to lose the cow. That's my philosophy on it. But, and I tell my people all the time, in my role, one single decision I can make could wreck the entire company. How? All of a sudden our earnings go down. All of a sudden we're in the middle of a recession. All those two things might happen together. I don't know. Next thing you know, our earnings are down, the recession hits, and we can't hire people, where our cash flow is in jeopardy, and companies go down like this. And if you don't believe it, you look at Kodak. That's just an easy example of a mega company that went belly up because of one major decision, the decision not to get into the digital space. They could. They had the expertise.
They did. They
didn't want to.
As I understand, they did some digital work, but they thought the digital was going to go a path, and they didn't see that it went a completely opposite path, as I understand the story. But I wasn't at Kodak at the time, so I don't really know. Okay, I want to go back to, you said you took a factory, a whole workforce, and turned them into self-directed work and teamwork, and that a lot of people didn't want to take that level of accountability. And particularly when you started with a workforce that wanted to check their brain when they walked in the door, and they'd pick it up on the way home in the evening. So what do you mean by self-directed? How did you get there? And how do you know you can trust them today?
Yeah. Everybody loves teamwork, right? Yeah, join our team, become part of our team. You see, in fact, I got signs right outside of my office. Everybody's trying to take my employees away, everybody else in town. So they all got their signs out there. We're hiring. Join our team. If you want to be in a team, come team. Teamwork is such an overused phrase, and companies claim they want teams, and maybe they even do, but they do everything to make sure that can't happen. Let me give you some examples. I want teamwork, but I do individual performance appraisals. I don't evaluate all of you as a team. I evaluate you as individuals. I want teamwork, but in a meeting, the guy who comes up and makes you look bad because he had a better idea, he's going to get commended for that. And so there's always policies and procedures, particularly in big companies, that work against teams. In the hiring process, if you want somebody to be part of a team, why wouldn't you let the team interview this person? That's what we do, but they don't. They have an individual person do the individual interview, and so there's just a plethora of things that they work against. Oh, and compensation. When it's time to pass out compensation at the end of the year, manufacturing guy gets his thing. If he hit his goals, the quality guy gets his thing. If he gets his goals, but they don't collaborate and cooperate as a team because they're not compensated to get a team. I'll give an example. I worked for a company once. I wasn't the CEO. I wouldn't have tolerated this. Manufacturing guy at the end of the month would load up a bunch of trailers with product that hadn't been sold yet, ship them out. They'd drive around town until the first of the month so he could claim it as, and so he'd get his goodies, right? Quality guys, on the other hand, they get paid to not ever let anything get out the back door, period.
Right.
Because it might have a defect, right?
Right.
And so that individually compensating people and rewarding people for results is not ever going to get your team. In my company, as an example, we have one metric that drives compensation. We do the I think they used to call it hay. So we're competitive in terms of base compensation. When it comes to incentives at the end of the year, there's only one number for everybody in the whole place, everybody. And it's called operating income compared to the budget. If we hit the budget for operating income, everybody gets a predetermined amount of incentive compensation, everybody, every single person. And if we don't hit it, nobody gets it. That includes me, by the way. And so when you're all driving to one number, there's a million things that go into that number. Product has to be shipped, has to be made, has to be checked, has to be this, has to be that. The order has to come in, all that kind of stuff. A million things. And if you try to compensate every single thing and incentivize every single thing to the expense of other little things, you don't ever get there. And the power, this is so powerful, Wanda. Once I was walking through the factory, we're on a calendar year, and I think it was like December 18th or some darn thing. And a guy came up to me and he said, I'm a little worried that we're not going to make our profit budget this year. Is there anything I can do to help? Now, I tell people, when's the last time somebody in the factory was worried about the company making its profit budget? Well, in most cases, he's not paid to worry about that. And if you pay him to worry about that, you know, they say, always said, what's measured gets done. That's true, but what gets compensated gets done.
Gets done. Absolutely. I was with a company today, in fact, where they were talking about, you know, not having the money to invest in some of the opportunities that they'd like to and that the team was really enthusiastic for. And it's just a difficult market for this company in a moment in time. And the person explaining why it was a difficult market used some financial terms. And my statement to everybody afterwards is, if you don't understand that story, then it's on you to go and learn it, to go and figure out what is driving the profitability of this company, because you need to know that. You need to be making your decisions accordingly on that. But I love your idea that everybody at the end of the year is compensated on whether you make it or not. That sounds like a good strategy to me.
Well, it is. And, you know, the individual departments have to have their individual goals. Don't misunderstand me. So we don't eliminate that. But at the end of the day, it all coagulates up to the number that everyone's shooting for. And it's just a very powerful way to do it.
Well, and imagine having an entire operation that understands what is driving operating budget and what am my area doing that is going to driving the operating income. Seems to me that's where money is, you know, not lost.
And we tell them every month, we apprise them, every single person, where are we in terms of the budget? So it's not like, you know, I can't remember the old adage was, if you're trying to bowl but you can't see where the pins are until the end of the game. Same thing with operating income or any other metric. If they don't know what it is until the end of the year, it's useless. So we tell them every month, gather them all together. Here's where we are on the profit budget. Here's where we need to be, et cetera. And they sort of all row in the same direction.
Right. I love it. All right. So let's go back to this notion of, so you said we're going to eliminate all the things that keep teams from being teams. We're going to systematically take them out. It's a team. We're going to compensate them as a team. We're going to reward them as a team. We're going to hire as a team. All of it's going to be team oriented. Now, how do you get this self-directed thing?
Well, that's a good question. Again, we interview for that.
Okay.
So if you you know, salary people tend to be self-directed. I mean, they don't have normally they don't have standards and procedures. You know, financial accounting would be maybe a little different. We interview for, do you want to be part of a self-directed team or not? We don't ask it exactly that way, because then they'll go, yeah, of course I do, you know. So we want to make sure that people are, you know what, and this is easy around southeastern Minnesota. I like to hire farmers or children of farmers or people who have worked on a farm, because that's the place where you learn reliance, where you learn responsibility, where you learn, you know, you don't get told every day, you got to do this, you got to do that, then you got to do this. I like farmers, I really do. And a lot of the people we hire, we interview them with that in mind. The team will talk to them and ask them questions relating to, well, how do you like to, what do you prefer in a working environment? Do you like getting told exactly what you should do? Does that make you, and you get an answer to that, or you don't. And so you bring them in the front door already, either if they work for another company, we know if they're self-directed or not in town. It's not that big of a town. We already know. If they work for a company that is very strict and demanding in their procedures and their work instructions, we just won't hire them, because we can't change them. If they work for somebody under an iron fist for all their career, I'm not going to change them. I don't even want to try. So we tend to find people for smaller companies and for actually from farms And so they'll either get through that vetting process or they won't. And then what happens is every morning, our employees in the factory get together in small groups. This particular area, that particular area. And by the way, they're all cross-trained. They can work in any department. And then they get on the computer, pull up the orders report. What's due for today? They go build it, they pack it, and they ship it. And they do this without any boss. The closest thing I have to a boss in my factory, Wanda, is the guy that orders the raw material, which is a big accountability and a lot of money. It's his job to see to it that the raw material is there when the employees get together and decide and figure out what has to be built for today. So we don't work in areas of our factory that don't have orders today. So I walk through the factory right now, and this one area right here won't have anybody in it. It'll look like a ghost town. That's because we didn't get orders for that today. And this area over here is humming like a top because we got a bunch of orders over there. So the self-directed workforce is part of the equation. The other part of it is they have to be able to be adaptable to move in any area. Self-directing isn't much good if this guy doesn't know how to do this job over here. So everyone's cross-trained, and that's an issue and an opportunity that took years to get that to the place where people could do that. People generally like to stay in their, well, you know this, in their comfort zone. So I'm here, I go, ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. That's all I want to do. That's all I ever want. I don't want them. I don't want them. The people that I attract and that I want are people who go, I love this change, this variety. Today I'm doing this. I don't have to do this. In fact, we automated one procedure. We've automated a lot of procedures out there, but the one we did most recently is because people didn't like to do it because it was so boring. It was like a saw going through a thing. They didn't like it because it was boring. So I said, let's automate that. I don't want you doing boring jobs out there. And so if you give people those kind of opportunities and you're careful in understanding what their needs are, then they're a lot more satisfied and therefore a lot more productive. I'm not doing it altruistically. I have a profit motive.
Right. And an efficient motive and a customer satisfaction motive and a whole bunch of all those that lead to profitability. All right, Steve, last question. Let me ask you one more time about this change thing about resistancing. So you have said, people resist change because it's an unknown. And I may not like what I'm doing today, but at least I know how to do it. I know where my skill set is, and the fear of what's out there and might not be relevant and I might not be succeed. All of that stuff weighs on people, and the gossip mill weighs on people, even if it's not accurate. And they know it's not accurate. It will still weigh on the emotional baggage. So you said you need to be clear. You need to give reasons that what are the good things that are going to happen if we do, and what are the bad things if we don't. You need to be concise in what the change is about, and you need to give people compelling reasons of what's in it for them. That's the good and the not good. All right. Even with all that set up, you have some people who just are slow to get on board. So how do you deal with that resistance?
There's two kinds of slow. I'm trying my best, and it's taken me a little longer maybe than it might otherwise. I'll go with those people all day long. And they know that. The other kind of slow is I just don't want to do it. Even after all this talk and all this reason, all this stuff, I don't want to do it. Okay, goodbye. The slow, it's like when we started the innovation drive, I knew people would be afraid they'd get fired if they couldn't innovate. Couldn't and don't want to are two different things. So I was very clear with people, you're not going to get fired because you can't innovate. You've never been asked to do that in your whole life, in your whole career. This is something new and different. Nobody's going to get fired because automation, and nobody's going to get fired because they're slow to innovate. As long as you're trying, and as long as you're working on it, you're golden. And it took a while. And so then we had a situation, I'll just cover this briefly, where you don't want a certain segment of the workforce to be the cool kids. Now, you were probably a cool kid in high school. I was not. I was sort of like the not cool kids crowd, right? What you don't want. So then we had the electronic side, which was up and coming, but wasn't paying the bills yet. And the mechanical side, which was paying the bills. And at every time I had all employee meeting, I'd talk about, there are no cool kids here. Because it was easy for them to look at the electronic side. Well, there's the future. If I can't get in there, I'm toast. No, we're always going to have a place for the mechanical side. We're always going to have a place for the electronic side. Just because you're not in one doesn't mean that your job would be in jeopardy.
Okay. I think one of the things that I like I like the clarity of communication, of what's in it, what we're going to lose if we don't do this, what this means, why. I like all of that. I love the singularity around the team focus and the compensation for the team and the single number and, kind of the forces that drive that. I like this idea of hiring for self-direction. So all of that I like. But I also like the fact that you train people in what they need to know to do the new thing that you're asking them to do. And I think that's a piece that is overlooked. It's kind of like assume everybody will figure it out. And they don't. I think training is part of the comfort. It shows me how. It gives me confidence I can.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem. I wrote a piece for, I think, Industry Week or something about why people don't do what you want them to. The only two reasons. One, they don't want to. And that's a different problem. They don't know how to. And often leaders assume what you just mentioned, that, well, you should know how to do this. Well, you will not. Well, it's crazy. No wonder people are scared to death out there when they get a new assignment that they don't understand.
Yeah. And certainly today with all the talk about automation, I think lots of people are really anxious that means it takes over their job. But again, I come back to, are we training them? How we're using automation, what automation looks like, where it goes, what's your role look like? How does that shift? That's all a very different conversation than just the anxiety that's out there. Okay. All right, Steve, what have we not talked about that people need to know when they're thinking about change or transformation?
Well, as I think the title of your program is, out of your comfort zone. And I think maybe you even wrote about this in your book. It's like nothing gets accomplished of any value in your comfort zone. And everything is out of the comfort. All your risk is out of the comfort zone. All your anxiety is out of the comfort zone. If you're comfortable, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Someone said today there is increased uncertainty and there's increased risk. With every increased risk and every increased opportunity, there's increased uncertainty and decreased comfort. That is part of the process.
I hate it. I'm no different than anybody else. I don't like to get out of my comfort zone, but obviously I've done it a lot of times in my career, but I don't like it. So if anybody thinks anybody thinks that you'll be comfortable being uncomfortable, it ain't going to happen. It just ain't going to happen.
So you talk about it with people, you talk about the discomfort, you talk about the process, you talk about the opportunity. It's all transparent and you give people the tools to know how to succeed. One
of the keys to my leadership is I'm very transparent. Now, there's a few things I can't tell people because they're just kind of company confidential. Just a very few things. Other than that, I tell them everything. I tell them what's going on, and they know that I'm not going to surprise them. They know they don't have to walk away from a meeting going, what's he not telling me here? They don't have to worry about that. I mean, transparency is, other than what you can't really talk about, transparency is very, very important. I want transparency in the world.
Who doesn't?
I don't get it most places.
That's why you're the CEO, because you want to create that kind of transparency. All right. Steve, what a fascinating conversation. So many points to take away, including when you say you mean it, then back it up. If you said it's not tolerant, fire them, give people the training and the support, even if it's taking them a while to get there. Distinguish the ones that are slow from the ones that don't want to or aren't going to try. Acknowledge that it's uncomfortable, it's hard, and talk about it. Keep it open, along with many other things. Steve, thanks for being a guest today. Again, the book we've been talking about is Metamorphosis, and Steve's website is stephenlblue.com. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. And join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.